Hello and welcome to Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that aims to redefine what it means to reach our full potential by exploring how movement and mindset impacts our lives and how we can all work to show up as the best versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder at TEC, and before we get started, I've got an all call. If you're a coach or an entrepreneur in the health and fitness industry who's trying to grow your business without burning out, I want to personally invite you to apply for the Growth Circle. The Growth Circle is our business accelerator program at TEC, and it's designed specifically to serve providers like you in the health and fitness industry. People who are incredible at what they do, but they need a proven framework and real support to actually scale. Let's be real, running a coaching business can feel like a grind. You're juggling programming and client communication, marketing, admin work, and somehow you're still trying to grow your business. That's where the Growth Circle comes in. Inside the program, we help you nail down your ideal client and get really clear on what your offer is. We help you build a consistent lead gen process so you're not wondering where your next client comes from. We help you improve your sales skills without feeling salesy. And most importantly, create systems and support so that you're not doing it alone. You'll be a part of a driven community of other business owners in this space who get it. We host regular group calls, team intensives, mastermind sessions to make sure you're never stuck trying to figure it out in a silo. So if you're tired of winging it, if you're tired of trying to do it all by yourself, to recreate the wheel, figure out what levers to pull, what's broken and what's not, if you're ready to turn your passion into a business that actually works for you, I want to invite you to apply. You can find the link to the Growth Circle in our show notes. And I want you to really think about what's best for you and your business. I want you to think about how your business can really make an impact on the industry and how it can give you the life that you're excited about and make the money that you deserve, working with the clients that you love, spending time investing in the things that you care about and you're passionate about. So if this is a problem you're committed to solving and you want to take your business to the next level, again, click the link in the show notes. I can't wait to hear from you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. One of the themes we keep coming back to on this show is the idea that endurance is not just about physical effort. It's about the internal work that's required to keep moving through pressure and uncertainty, responsibility, and seasons where things aren't necessarily clear. And through this, we've learned that endurance shows up in lots of forms. Sometimes it shows up in our physical effort. Sometimes it shows up in our relationships. Sometimes it shows up in our work and the other goals that we have. But just as often, it shows up in the decisions that we make as leaders, as high performers, as people who are trying to build something meaningful over long periods of time. And the truth is, those long seasons of growth don't look glamorous. They certainly don't look glamorous from the outside looking in. And we know that they involve risk, they involve failure, they involve moments where you question whether the direction you're heading in is actually the right one. But there are also seasons that shape who we become. And today's guest, Chris Harris, knows a lot about these kinds of seasons. Chris is an entrepreneur. He's a leadership consultant. He is a keynote speaker, and he works with individuals and organizations on developing clarity, conviction, and resilience in how they lead and operate. His work focuses heavily on the internal side of leadership. So the mindset, the identity, the personal discipline that allows people to show up consistently when the pressure is high and the outcomes are uncertain. In our conversation, we explore what it actually means to lead with conviction in a world that often rewards short-term thinking. We talk about his identity and how that's shifted over time. We talk about how that's informed his decision-making, his emotional endurance, and what's really required for him to build something over long periods of time and all of the seasons of life that he's been through. We talk about why real leadership often begins with doing the internal work that most people avoid. Chris also shares his perspective on responsibility and the importance of staying grounded when you're navigating seasons of growth and pressure. So, above all else, this episode is not about quick wins. It's not the motivational hustle. It's not the quick, let's get fired up. This is real. This is advice that is tried and true from someone who's lived it that you can sink your teeth into. Ultimately, it's about the long road. It's the internal work. It's the kind of endurance that allows people to stay aligned with who they are, what matters most to them, while they continue to grow into who they are becoming. So, with that, I'd love to get into it. Here's my conversation with Chris Harris. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
It's great to have you. Excited to get into it with you today. I'll start where I like to start with most folks on the show, which is at the beginning. So I'd love for you to take us back. What were some of those early experiences? And I think specifically for you and your background, I'd love to hear more about some of those early experiences that shaped how you feel like you handle pressure today.
So it starts with me going back to childhood. Actually, my mother was a heroin addict and a heroin dealer. When I was 10 years old, she was sent to prison. I had two sisters. One was 11, one was 12. So we were all pretty close in age, very close as friends. And they went to the girls' home. I went to the boys' home. And as the result, I spent most of my childhood either with in orphanages or with foster families. I spent a lot of time homeless, living on the streets. And, that really had a profound impact on me. And, that was where I really learned the power of perspective. And, you can't teach mindset if you don't really have a firm hold on perspective, because that's our superpower when it comes to mindset. So, but if you would have asked my two sisters, Taylor, how their lives turned out so horribly, and they did, both of them followed in the footsteps of my mother, and prison and drug abuse and all sorts of other things. But if you'd have asked them, how did your lives turn out so bad? They would have squared you in the eye. And with all of the conviction of their faith, they would have said, well, that's easy. My mom's a drug addict. And, but this is where I learned the power of perspective, because if you would have looked at me and said, how'd your life turn out so great? I would have said, that's easy. My mother was a drug addict. And, you got three people who are all raised, in the same exact environment by the same people in the same city, under the same conditions and circumstances. And, and it all just comes down to, the perspective we choose to assign to that. And that carried over to me into the military. When I was 18, I graduated high school and went right into the military. And then from there, after I got out of the military, became a private contractor working with elite special forces for about 25 years. And that's where I really learned a lot about mindset. Now, I was teaching it while I was learning it from the people who are really the epitome of mindset. And so I was learning mindset, I was teaching mindset, I was practicing mindset. And then when I pivoted, into corporate America and then eventually keynote speaking, I really just leverage a lot of those same principles that I learned starting as a child, and then as a private contractor for 25 years. So I really feel like I've just had some great firsthand experiences with the subject that that's so dear to my heart, which is, performance through mindset.
Yeah, it's that perspective. It's so easy to, in one way, or in many ways, see both sides of that. Like you said, you could choose the path you follow, and I think that's certainly the struggle, as and we'll unpack this as we continue our conversation. But that's the struggle so many folks have, right? Is what do you do with that information, right? You have two roads, and you can pick one that supports your goals and your dreams, and one that crushes them. And it's hard to see that in the moment, but that's incredible that you chose the path you did. It makes me think about too, just responsibility. Specifically, I'm curious, what role did responsibility play in those early days? Because it certainly strikes me that you would have been saddled with so much, right? Things that were, holding you back, or at least probably felt that way. But was there any part of that where you felt like you had a responsibility to rise above, or to do more, or to go a different path, or what was that?
I would frame responsibility from the context of work ethic.
Hmm.
Um, when you're 11, 12 years old and you're living on the street and you're sleeping under bridges and eating out of dumpsters, um, and you don't want to stay there. Okay, that was me. I did not want to stay there. Now I want to, just for full transparency, when I was homeless, I chose to be homeless. It just the winters are rough growing up in Dayton, Ohio. But when the weather changed and when the temperatures were comfortable, I would choose to run away from wherever I was living. I would rather be homeless on my own, than living with someone who I felt like didn't want me, or I was a burden, or I was at risk for any kind of abuse. And so I just want to clarify, I was homeless by choice. And then when the winter came, I would always go back to Child Protective Services or wherever. So, but I didn't want to be homeless. I didn't like being homeless. I just preferred being homeless than living with a bunch of strangers. And for me, taking responsibility was work ethic. I learned very quickly, if you don't work, you don't eat. And I found ways to work. And, when you're a, ruddy little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes living, out in the, Ohio, it was always pretty easy to find somebody who would give me a job to do. Sweep the debris out of my alley, mow my grass, shovel my snow, rake these leaves. There was always someone who was willing to give me a few bucks to work. And so I took responsibility in the form of working hard. And if I'm not, if I'm not willing to work, I, I would say this to any of your listeners: if you're not willing to work, I don't know who can help you. And so I did take on a tremendous responsibility, and from the standpoint of, if I don't work, I don't eat, and nobody's coming to save me. And the way that I can save myself is by getting out there, and by the sweat of my own brow, I can work and I can earn. And that has served me so well throughout my life. I'm out of all the things I've gotten from my childhood, many of which I would consider to be gifts. I would say my work ethic is probably in the top three.
Mm. I love that. That strikes a chord with me and my personal story as well. It's feel like by no means similar to yours and what you went through, but certainly the work ethic piece, and that's always been a gift. Something I was given early on, and I've been in the moment. It maybe didn't seem like it, but I've now realized that if you can work, you can you can make it where you want to go. Um, was there any identity or like belief about yourself that you feel like you had to dismantle before you could shift into that work mode and into that kind of getting yourself on the path and in the direction of the places that you want to be? Because I have to imagine you were it would only be natural, I would assume, to carry a lot of kind of limiting self-doubt and beliefs and things that you had gone through. Was there any part of that had to kind of shift, or you had to shed before you were able to start on a path that felt positive?
That's a great question, and it's the right question. So, um, yes, it had to shift, but I had to shift without giving up the gold. So, what I mean by that is, one of the reasons I had such a strong work ethic as a child and as a teenager was because I never had anyone who told me they loved me, or that they were proud of me, or that they thought I could achieve great things. There was no positive affirmation from anyone. Um, well, maybe a couple martial arts instructors, but definitely no parental type figures. And so I craved approval, craved it. And so if you gave me $5 to cut your grass, I was going to cut your grass better than anyone ever cut it before. Not because I wanted you to let me cut your grass again, but because I wanted you to come out there and look at that and go, wow, young man, you did a fantastic job. I was addicted to approval, and I learned that by doing a hard, good day's work and doing the job with excellence, that it might get me that, that one little sentence, that smile, that wink, that hand on the shoulder, well done. And so the problem was I got into my 20s and I realized I need to maintain this work ethic, but I got to change the reason why I work so hard. How do you keep the work ethic, but get rid of the strong drive for approval, that's fueling it? And that was a challenge.
Mm.
When we put in a good hard day's work, Taylor, there's something driving that.
Mm-hmm.
Money, success, approval, affirmation from a parent or a loved one, keeping our kids off the street. There's always something that's driving that work ethic, the need to eat, not wanting to starve, whatever it is. And when we realize that what's driving this behavior, this good behavior, but what's driving it is it's cancerous to my soul. We have to find a way to throw the baby out without throwing out the bathwater, or however they say it, right?
Mm-hmm. So what was that shift? What was the why on the other side of that? If it, when you recognize, like you said, that it needed to shift and it couldn't be just purely affirmation, where did you land?
It happened in phases, and in my newest book that I just released literally a month ago, which is on mindset. I have a big section, and it's the first time I've ever written about this part of mindset before, so it was very challenging to write. But I talk about identity and identity shifts and how they happen many times throughout our life. We've all heard from some of the greats like Simon Sinek, the importance of finding your why, right? But what a lot of people don't talk about is that your why changes and evolves with your identity, with your role. So if you're a college student who is now just graduated and you're entering into the workforce for the first time, and you got to stand on your own 2 feet, no more student loans, no being subsidized by your parents, and you got your apartment and you got your car and insurance. And well, there's an identity shift going from being in college to now having your first job and being completely dependent on yourself. That's an identity shift. Retiring, working for the same company for 25, 30 years, and then retiring. And now what does my day look like? Identity shift. Having kids, getting married, identity shifts. Becoming an empty nester after raising kids for 20 or 30 years, and now it's an empty house. So anytime these events happen, our identity should shift into our new role, because what used to serve us no longer serves us. But also our why has to shift with that identity. And so there were many shifts that happened, but the first really big one that happened for me when I had to say, I want to keep working hard and I love this drive that I have. And man, when I put in a hard day's work, I feel God's pleasure. I mean, that's how I feel about a hard day's work, but I can't keep doing it for the praise of man. So why am I doing it? And that first big shift was I realized that I absolutely loved pouring into others and helping them succeed. I loved it. And I call it throwing down the rope. So instead of I want your approval, I'm now going to be driven by I just am highly motivated by throwing down the rope. And for people who are willing to do the work, I'm not going to pull you up onto the summit, but I will definitely hold and anchor that rope and encourage you as you climb. And that became the new why.
Hmm. I love that metaphor, throwing down the rope, like you said. And I'm not gonna pull you up, but I'll certainly, stand here as an anchor. That's powerful. What was the most challenging season or confronting season that you faced when you were shifting that why with that identity?
Well, the most challenging one was a different identity shift. So, as a private contractor, as I had mentioned, I taught military and special forces for 25 years. And what I taught was extremely demanding, physically demanding. And, you're working with, these elite athletes who are, 26, 28 years old. And, when I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, it wasn't a problem. But when they're still 26 and 28 years old, and now I'm in my 40s, it's pretty hard to roll with those guys. And so I had to come to the conclusion that I couldn't do it anymore physically. I lost my reaction times. I lost my heal rates. My injuries were lasting much longer, which was causing me to have to reschedule training and things like that. So I got to the point to where, I'm in my, I don't know, mid to late 40s, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And but that my identity was wrapped into that role heavily. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I had to figure something out. So I pivoted, into a professional B2B high tech sales career. And that was a very depressing season for me because my identity was wrapped up into what I did for 25 years, national defense and, to protect the innocent and safeguard the helpless. I mean, and now I can't do that anymore because I'm too old to be moving like that with, that level of talent at that age. And it was like, man, I got to redefine myself from scratch here. And I went through some self-pity and, some depression and woe is me. And, but like all men should do, you get up and you rub some dirt on it and you put a Band-Aid on it and you march forward. But that was a tough season because that was an identity that I didn't want to let go of. I loved it, and I never saw myself doing anything other than that. And so I think the hardest identity shifts are the ones where we absolutely love the identity we're in and we don't want to shift. It'd be like somebody who's been with the same company for years, if not decades, and they love their job, and all of a sudden they get a pink slip saying, "Hey, we got to let you go today." What do you mean you got to let me go? This job is my life. I love this job. I love this company. I love the culture. So those are forced identity shifts, and those are tough.
Hmm. Yeah, I hear that. Something I've had to wrestle with myself. So that is some. Um, it makes me, you talking about these transitions and from private contractor to sales to, like you said, keynote speaker and writer. And, there's been these big kind of, what seem to be very standout, very transitional seasons and moving from one very clear thing to another clear thing, but wholly different. And I'm curious if those, if which of those seasons have demanded something from you that you didn't anticipate? Was there anything, because you strike me as a calculated person, but I'm curious if any of those transitions, those identity shifts have demanded something from you that you didn't fully see coming or didn't anticipate.
Yeah. So great question. When I transitioned into sales, I chose sales because I was making really good money as a private contractor and I had a lot of autonomy. And I wanted to find something that, I could earn. I was always told that if you're really good in sales, you can earn autonomy, right? You don't want your boss, calling you every 10 minutes and asking you where you're at. You don't want to have to share your calendar with, 10 people. And you don't want to have to be in the office or in the cubicle every day, that you could earn the right to have autonomy. And you do that by just achieving a high level of sales performance. You want to sell so much to where when one of your coworkers comes up to the VP of sales and says, "Where's Chris Harris today? I haven't seen him in the office in 3 days." You want to be performing at the level to where that VP of sales looks at that person and says, "Mind your own business." Because that person is providing so much air cover for the rest of the team. So I was always told that you could earn that kind of autonomy. And I was always told that there was unlimited commissions, if you keep selling, the more you sell, the more you make. You want a raise? Give yourself a raise. Go out and sell more. And so that was very intriguing to me. And that's why I chose, technology sales. I wanted high ticket items with big commissions and competitive landscapes. And, but when I started selling, I made this decision that I wanted to become number one in the world, selling this technology. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea what a tough mountain that was to climb. And, the people who are in that top 3% of sales, with those sales thoroughbreds, they're a special breed, and they didn't get there by accident, and they don't stay there by accident. And so putting that on me, yeah, I could become number one. How hard could it be? Yeah, no. I learned very quickly that was a very ambitious goal.
Mm. Did you pivot away from that goal, or did it shift as you were in the process of growing in that space?
No, I achieved it. I remember being in San Diego for the annual, sales, whatever it's called, but it's the awards and it's the kickoff, and it's everything. But it's once a year, and there were probably 500 sales reps and managers, in the Hard Rock Cafe or Hard Rock Hotel Grand Ballroom, and I remember walking up on the stage as they handed me the first place award, which was the keys to a brand new convertible Porsche. Um, no, I achieved it. It about killed me,
Mm.
but I achieved it. And but if I would have known when making that commitment, when telling my wife this is what I'm going to do, had I known the price I was going to have to pay for that, I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have thrown down the gauntlet on that one, Taylor.
Mm. That's a good reminder. Some not the cost isn't always worth it. We say that we want these things, these goals, and I think there is a need a lot of times to kind of justify or rectify if that's a cost we're willing to pay, because it can be too high. And even when we accomplish the goal, we can look back and say, yeah, that was too much. I know I've had experiences like that. I mean, specifically for me in entrepreneurship, it's, I've gotten to the end of the line and it looked successful on paper and did all the things I wanted to do, and I was like, I think it was too much. It cost me my health. It cost me relationships. It cost me, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't do it again, had I been honest about what it was going to take. So I hear you there. It does make me think about, and this is, my language. I'd be curious to hear what yours is, but I think about alignment a lot. How do we make decisions, set goals, work to reach our full potential, but,
Excuse me.
in alignment with how we want to show up in the world and what's truly best for us. And yeah, I mean, to that end, I'm just curious, what is alignment, or again, the language that resonates with you or that you would use? What does that mean to you? And then maybe even to further that, what does it cost you when you've been out of alignment?
So I struggled look, when alignment's off, everything's off. And I look at alignment from two different perspectives. One would be just a very large 30,000 foot view of alignment. And that's if we were to take a look at our body, our mind, and our spirit. All right. We're all three. And I don't think you could say that one of the three is more important than the other. Because if one of those three is not being taken care of, how good can the other two be, right? I mean, so they're they're symbiotic. They need each other, and so the first answer would be, well, what happens when your body, your physical health, right, your mind, and when we say mind, that can mean mindset, conscious mind, subconscious mind. It can mean your soul. Soul, a lot of times means mind, heart, mind, and soul. Those are all kind of connected. And then we've got the spirit, right? So we got the spirit, we got the mind, and then we've got the body. And when one of those three are out of alignment, I mean, everything's off. And then let's come over here and look at just the mind. All right, forget the spirit and forget the body for a minute, and just the mind, the conscious, the subconscious, the left brain, the right brain, all of that. When there's misalignment there, then nothing works. And I'll give you an example. So, like when we talk about things that are involved with the mind that are not in alignment. So, we'll say, I've got a work ethic, okay, and I've got values. And those values are derived from, for me, they're derived from my faith, right? But everybody derives their values from, whatever they derive them from. But for me, my values are derived from my faith. And so I'm selling a high ticket product for a manufacturer, and it's expensive. I mean, this technology was very expensive. I mean, it was nothing for, it was very common to get $1 million purchase order, for somebody to buy this technology. But the stuff wasn't working. It wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. It wasn't delivering as advertised. It wasn't meeting, the spec sheet criteria as how we were selling it. And then that wasn't working, the manufacturer didn't always do the right thing with honoring the manufacturer's warranty. And so there was a lot of disgruntled people. You spend $1 million on a piece of tech, the expectations are high. You expect it to work. And it wasn't. And I was selling a lot of them. And I'm out of alignment now. Because if you're the customer and I'm sitting here and I'm having a conversation with you on why you need to buy this, but in the back of my mind, my phone is blowing up because of the disgruntled people who have bought, who are just angry, and rightfully so. This could jeopardize their business. They may have taken out a loan for this. They may have put a lien up against their family business, and I'm out of alignment. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I can't. Every time I sell one of these moving forward, I feel like I'm selling my honor for a purchase order, and I had to fix that very quickly. I'm grumpy, I'm irritable, I'm sitting next to my wife or my wife and kids, and I'm 1,000,000 miles away. They're like, you're at dinner with us, but where are you? I can't sleep. I'm having, a couple more cocktails than I probably need to have, whatever. That's manifesting itself somewhere. And I had to get that fixed.
Yeah, that's such a great representation. I think, we take even kind of boil down the product aspect of what you're talking about. I think we can often be very flippant with that. We think that, that doesn't factor into our values or the things that we are standing behind. That's kind of another thing, right? That's our work. That's what I'm selling, but my values are over here, and I can still be true to those. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's a great, really almost, kind of a nuanced answer there, where, I think it has to be present in all areas of your life. And if one thing is out of alignment, like you said, then it ripples into everything else. Outside of that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but has there been any other time or another area of your life where you've pursued something that looked successful, but it felt hollow or felt misaligned? I just think that's really powerful. These experiences are very powerful, and I'm curious to kind of draw that out even more.
I really struggled with coaching. I switched to where I don't do coaching anymore. I do executive coaching and I do consulting, and but just one-on-one individual coaching. Somebody's paying you, X amount of dollars per hour, and you're on a scheduled weekly call or biweekly call with them. And I didn't like that at all. It was very disappointing for me. And the reason is because I have absolutely no way of holding you accountable. And so I'm selling you this advice or this counsel or, roadmap. I'm your guide, whatever you want to call it. And you're paying me hundreds of dollars an hour. But at the end of the day, I'm telling you what you need to do, and you're telling me you're going to do it. And then we get on next week's call and you haven't done any of it. And that was just a dud for me. So I switched then to executive coaching, and that's where I'm talking to like an executive leadership team within a company, or I'm talking to a sales team. But now there's accountability. There's corporate fiscal responsibility. Like we're paying this person to come on, and he's giving us these action items and these milestones and these next steps. And, look, if you're a VP of sales and you're paying me this money to be on a call with your team, your sales team, for the next 10 weeks to improve their sales performance, and I send you an email saying, hey, so-and-so missed the call again. So-and-so wasn't prepared. So like that's an after action report that I'm required to send, right? That's an accountability report. Well, that VP is going to take care of it. Everybody on that call knows my boss hired this guy. We're paying him a lot of money and I need to do what I need to do. So that really fixed a lot of that. And then consulting, I often get asked, people say, well, what's the difference between consulting and coaching, executive coaching? And I say, well, so my consulting fees are twice as much per hour as my executive coaching fees. So think about that for a minute. All right. So if I'm charging $1 per hour for executive coaching, I'm charging $2 per hour for consulting. And when I'm bringing on a new client, they always see that discrepancy. One's double. Like, what are you giving me as a consultant that would justify twice the cost as an executive coach? And the answer is pretty simple. So as an executive coach, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to help you find the answer. I'm going to lead you to the answer. As a consultant, I'm just going to tell you what you need to do. And as a consultant, we're going to get there in half the time. So at the end of the day, they're both the same price. Do you just want to say, hey, here's all of the stuff that I'm dealing with. Here's the problem I'm trying to solve, or here's the benefit I'm trying to gain. Here's my fear. Here's my greed. What do I need to do? Great. I'm going to be a consultant and we're going to get there in half the time. But some people don't want that. They want this to be their journey. And okay, if it's going to be your journey, it's half the price, but it's going to take twice the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends on what the individual or the group's value proposition is. Is it time or results? And people value, one of those things differently, or each of those things differently. So there's a pivot there in, pivoting from, like you said, coaching to executive coaching to consulting. How did you and how do you discern when to push forward versus when to pivot? It's hard to see the forest for the trees sometimes.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, and I haven't always gotten it right. I think this is where metacognition comes in, and metacognition it's like awareness on steroids. So, and here's how I would define metacognition. It's the art of thinking about what you're thinking. All right. Like if you're driving and you look down at your speedometer and you realize you're going 80 miles an hour in a 60. All right. That's awareness. Okay. You look down, you realize it's a 60. I'm going 80. Oh my gosh. And you tap on the brakes a little bit. That's awareness. Or you look out the window and see a state trooper on the side of the road and you hit the brakes a little harder. That's awareness. Metacognition is when you say, wait a minute, why am I driving 80? Like, am I in a hurry? Am I running late? Do I really think that risking, getting a $400 speeding ticket or hurting another driver, is it really worth, getting somewhere a few minutes earlier? And that's metacognition. And it's thinking about what you're thinking and why you're thinking it real time. And it's a gift and it's a muscle and it can be developed. And when you start thinking about whether do I stay and continue and forge ahead or do I pivot, that's where metacognition is king, because you stop and say, why? It's deeper than why am I considering pivoting or why am I considering staying with this when everybody around me is saying, man, just shut the doors, bankrupt it, whatever, pay off the lease, get out of this. It's killing you. And I'm ignoring everybody, or I'm wanting to pivot when everybody's saying, hey, man, you're 30 feet from gold, Chris, don't give up. And I'm thinking about pivoting. Metacognition is like, I'm going to stop and I'm going to really think about why I'm even considering these options and what they mean to me. What's really going on down in the subconscious mind. And that's what metacognition is. Awareness, you're kind of aware of what's going on in the conscious mind, which is only about 5% of what goes on. Metacognition, I'm going to pull over and I'm going to dig down into what's going into that 95%, that operating system that's actually running the computer, right? It is the computer. And so, but I've chosen wrong before. and I've chosen right before. But, should I stay or should I go? Man, that's a tough one.
Hmm. How you mentioned being able to work that muscle. How do we do that?
Repetition,
Hmm.
just repetition. How do we develop confidence in something? Doing it over and over and over. And, you look at Steph Curry, man, popping up 3-pointers. How did he get so good at popping up 3-pointers? From popping up 3-pointers, right? And it's repetition.
Hmm. So just the awareness that it is something that can and should be worked, and then trying to catch yourself in that action and leaning in and kind of doubling down on that, thinking about the why you're thinking about it.
Yeah, if you are aware of the what, that's awareness.
Hmm.
And every time you become aware of a what, get in the habit of saying, okay, stop, hold on, but why? And if you keep doing that over and over, it'll become a habit. And now awareness is like, that's who you used to be. I'm not an aware guy anymore. I'm a metacognitive guy. Because if I'm aware of what, I'm going to take a brief microsecond and say, and why? And now we start evolving.
Mm. Okay, man, that's powerful. Yeah, I
Like,
love
oh my
that.
gosh, I just hit snooze, which means that I'm probably going to barely make it to where I'm supposed to go this morning on time because I'm going to hit snooze again. Okay, that's awareness. Wait a minute. Why did I just hit snooze again?
Mm.
And now we start breaking old habits.
Yeah, because yeah, it's not as simple in that example. It's not as simple as I'm just tired. There's a reason behind, why. If you backdate, well then, okay, why didn't you go to bed on time? Why didn't you prioritize your health? Why didn't you? Why? And you keep rolling that back until you find the
Why did
true
I even
answer.
feel the need to set this alarm? If I'm willing
Yeah.
to sit here and punch in for another 15 minutes, why did I even set the alarm at the time I set it for?
Right.
Was that time not, thought through?
Mm. Yeah. I love that. That's great. All right. I want to talk um, about kind of your work in developing leaders and organizations, specifically under stress. We've talked about your work in lots of different environments that are, high demand, high performing, high stress ultimately. And I know resilience is one of the things that you work with individuals and organizations on. And so let's just start high level. What do you feel like leaders and or even organizations misunderstand about resilience?
Well, a lot of the people on the team may not have resilience. So you've got, let's just say, the collective. And let's say you're a leader who's over, 30 people, whether that's a divisional president or you're a CEO of a small company, right? But let's just say your sphere of influence is over these 30 individuals, and you guys are going through tough times, and you're going to have to suck it up, buttercup. You can't assume that all 30 of those people have resilience because many of them don't. In fact, a select few of them do. Let's roll up our sleeves, whatever it takes. I'm all in. And I'll give you an example. We got to do whatever it takes, or this is either going to make us or break us. And you, as that leader, I mean, you're working Saturdays, you're working. I mean, Sunday night, you're sitting in front of your computer, preparing for Monday morning. You're eating a sandwich for dinner, standing up at the kitchen counter. I mean, it's all go. But you can't expect that from your 30 team members that are following. You can't expect that. You hope that they're committed to that level. You hope you got that kind of buy-in. But what happens when, 5 of them do and 25 don't? This is where leadership is really tested. So the first thing I would say about resilience is understand that just because you have it does not necessarily mean the team that you're leading does. And then the second thing is, so how do I how do I transfer that to them? Maybe not permanently, but for this project, for this cause, right? For this expedition that we're on. How do I transfer that? And, it's like a general, a military general who says, all right, guys, we're taking this hill and we're not coming back. Who's with me? Well, the generals who basically have everybody raise their hand and say, I'm absolutely all in. When do we start? Whose car are we taking? Well, those generals are far and few between, and we idolize them with books and movies, right, when we come across one. But what that general has that's so special is that they're able to basically create what's called a shared purpose. This is what makes a 6-man special forces team so hard to beat. It's their shared purpose. I mean, they move as a unit, they rise as a unit, they fall as a unit. And so if you're a leader and you need a team to be resilient to get to this desired outcome, it's all going to come down to how well you were able to transfer that purpose. I mean, there's a reason you're standing over the counter eating a sandwich for dinner. There's a reason you're putting together a business plan or a proposal Sunday night. There's a reason that you're missing your kids' soccer games or whatever, because you have a belief in this, right? It's important to you. You know your why. It's connected to something bigger to you than it is your team. But if you can take that and share that purpose with your team, you now have 30 resilient people that will take the hill for you. So to answer your question, don't assume they have it. Assume they don't. And then find out whatever it is that they should have, right, and transfer it to them. And, the definition of sales is the same definition of leadership. To sell means to influence the decisions or actions of another. To lead is to influence the decisions or actions of another. They just have two completely different outcomes. But in both cases, we are, as a sales professional or as an executive leader, I'm being paid to influence the decisions and actions of others. And there's no better way to do that, no faster, long-lasting way to do that than to create an environment of shared purpose.
How do we transfer that shared purpose?
Well, first of all, Taylor, you have to know your why. If you're the leader and you want to know how to transfer it, you first have to say, well, what is my why? What's my purpose? And then now can I articulate that effectively? Because it's one thing to say, I know it. It's another thing to say, and now I have found a way to articulate it, communicate it in a way that will be meaningful to them. So one, identify it. And then two, figure out the best way to articulate it in a way that's meaningful. And that usually happens in the way of storytelling.
So So starting with clarity for yourself, and then
thinking about what you're thinking.
Yeah. And then building a narrative or formulating a narrative that allows you to kind of convincingly communicate that to the people around you such that it taps into what they care about or invites them into that story as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you feel like? Let me ask this question a different way. Are there patterns that you see when leaders collapse under pressure? Because we just talked about that going well, ultimately, right? Creating that shared purpose. We become that general. The thing works out. We shift from eating sandwiches over the counter to having a steak and celebrating. But in the very real likelihood that we fail, what are the patterns you see when leaders collapse under that pressure?
Usually they have not done a good job of identifying their rivals. We all have rivals, and leaders are no different. And they need to be aware of what those rivals are. So I always tell people that when you create a goal, the first thing you need to do is you need to identify your focus, right? 2 focus points. And because these are going to help keep you going, right, when it gets hard. And the first one is, why does this goal matter to me, right? Why does it matter to me? That's focus number 1. Focus point number 2 is, what is the process that I'm going to create to get me from here to there? Because if you focus on the goal, you're going to fail. The goal should be nothing more than just a catalyst that creates the process. The process is those day-to-day wins. It's that dopamine reward, right? I don't have to think about what's going to happen 6 months from now when I stand on the stage and I win the Porsche. I just got to think about, did I make my 20 dials today? Okay. If I focus on the process, I win the Porsche. So those are your 2 focus points. And then when the other side of creating a goal is you got to have your 2 friction points. Okay. And the 2 friction points are, number 1, what's my greatest internal saboteur that's most likely going to try to derail this thing? And I know this because this is what always tries to derail me just before I raise my arms in victory, right? And so, and the second friction point is, what am I going to do to, if that saboteur that always shows up just before I go ring the bell in victory shows up, what things am I going to put in place here, to keep that from happening? So you need your 2 focus points, and you need your 2 friction points. And if a leader is failing under pressure, just before they cross the finish line, the first thing I would ask them is, so tell me what your 2 focus and your 2 frictions were before you started on this endeavor. And 99% of the time they go, oh, I didn't do that.
I love that. The identifying your saboteur. That's something that I think about a lot, specifically with goal setting, is, these patterns are exactly that. They're patterns. The things that stopped you before are going to stop you again. Right. And so identifying them and then understanding how to build a process that allows you to sidestep them, or at least wrestle with them, and so they don't derail you ahead of time, right? Because we get to that same point every time, and we're like, oh, I can't believe this has happened again. Well, of course it's happening again. Like it's a pattern, right? These are things that we all wrestle with. We all have them. So I love that language is great. It's just identifying your saboteur. It's like he's sitting there waiting, right? And it's not if but when. So it causes me to think about, we have the other side of that. We talked about the leader. We have the team, which we touched on with the kind of shared buy-in. But how do you develop the emotional durability on the team side?
Well, that has to already be in place, and that's called psychological safety. So you need when we say company culture, what we're really talking about is a company's character. Okay. So your corporate culture is really your corporate character. And it needs to be one that's built around a strong foundation of psychological safety. And if you don't have that, they're going to go off the rails if you push them too hard. So you have to have that in place first. And if you don't, get it.
What's your one tool or piece of guidance for creating that? Because I think that's for many I imagine that feels like a big bridge to cross if it's not created. What's the guidance you would give someone to start to build that safety?
Well, first of all, you got to care. You have to really care about your people. You got to care about your team. You have to care. If you don't care about them, I mean, you can read the book on psychological safety and you can practice all the steps exactly as they're listed. But at the end of the day, if I don't feel like you care about me, it's just talking heads. So, and if you don't really care about your people, I don't know, you may want to go do something else, because the best leaders are the ones that the team know this person cares about me and this person has my back. And if I mess up, this person's they're going to show me grace. They'll probably correct me, maybe even write me up or reprimand me, but it's going to be done out of love. They're not going to make it personal. And at the end of the day, if they do, it's because they want to see me grow. They want to see me improve. They want to see me better. You know, if you are a leader and you're not living, walking, and breathing the mission statement on your company website, you've already lost psychological safety because you're a hypocrite.
Mm, yeah, I hear that.
I mean, your words and your actions have got to align.
Hmm. Where where do you feel like most high performers avoid discomfort? You know, we were talking about leadership and these there's this kind of inherent belief that these individuals, these high performers, they'll do anything. But I know the other side of that, and there's a lot of places we can hide, and you know those saboteurs that we talked about. So where in your experience do most high performers avoid discomfort that keeps them from the things they say they want?
I had someone explain to me a study years ago, and I found it very interesting. And I don't know if it's true or not. It certainly sounds true to me, but I was very intrigued by it. And it basically, there was a Fortune 500 company that wanted to know, hey, top sales performers, what do they have in common? What are the common denominators that top sales performers share? Because the cost of hiring the wrong person and getting them onboarded and getting them trained and getting them, insured in a company vehicle, and only to find out that they were a dud. It's very expensive, very taxing on a company. And so, wouldn't it be great if you kind of knew what the top performers all shared and just start interviewing for that, right? The thoroughbreds. And what they found in this study was that the thoroughbreds, top elite sales performers, right? Pareto's principle, the 20% of sales performers that are bringing in 80% of the revenue. And this is what they found, that it wasn't education, it wasn't pedigree, it wasn't, family genetics or anything like that. It was the things that they didn't think it would be. They typically came from broken homes. They typically had a chip on their shoulder. They had something to prove, either to themselves or others, and they typically lived way beyond their means. So they had to perform. And I remember hearing that, Taylor, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm going to be so good at sales.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I think there's certainly a piece of that. You know, I've heard it described different ways, and but high performers typically are one of the ways I've heard it described to me is they're high performing because they're trying to outperform their demons. And again, I can't remember who told me that, but years ago, and I also come from an ultra endurance background, so doing some of the hardest physical endeavors in the world, and everyone there has a chip on their shoulder, right? They all have things they're trying to outrun and grapple with and wrestle with, and I think it's no different than wherever we want to kind of insert high performance. I think that's certainly part of it. So
De-
yeah, it's
de-
good to hear.
Demons hate me
Mm. Why is
because
that?
I lived amongst them and made it out without becoming one of them.
Mm. That's great perspective. Yeah. Would you? Yeah. What with that? What belief? Maybe specifically as it relates to kind of coming out the other side of being surrounded by those demons. What belief do you feel like or what belief have you outgrown that's allowed you to get to where you're at today?
You know, I would say, just being an introvert, and I've always really been an introvert, and uh, I force myself, to do things like podcast or get on stage or, write a book where the world's giving their opinion about your thoughts and your words. And I have to really push myself hard to do those things. And, but, I was raised without being loved, right? I was never in an environment of love. I was in environments of neglect, right? And abuse. And so my opinions about love and healthy relationships and all that I just have never seen anything that I would consider a good example of a unconditional loving relationship. And where I really have transformed throughout my life, my career, my marriage, is I'm to the place now to where, like, if you were to ask me, Chris, what is the number one piece of advice you could give my listeners? I would say this: never withhold love when it's within your power to give it. Now, if you think about where I started, and now you look and say, well, this is the guy's number one piece of advice that he wants to leave listeners with: never withhold love if it's within your power to give it. Absolutely. Well, that's quite a shift, and it's taken decades to get there.
Extremely powerful. Yeah, what an incredible perspective shift. I mean, in really full circle, we started by talking about perspective, and you can go one way or the other. And, given what you came from to using that as your lens to see the world, is a powerful perspective. So I can't think of a stronger point to end on. Chris, this has been powerful and insightful. I'm grateful for your time, your expertise, and your passion.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. Great conversation.